welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name's Jenny Fielding. I'm actually Managing Director at Techstars. Techstars, for those of you who don't know, we're a worldwide network for entrepreneurs. Many of you guys know our accelerator programs. We've invested in over 2,000 companies, so massive portfolio. And as you can imagine, this topic is near and dear to my heart and to everyone at all of our portfolio companies when we think about scaling and we think about developing talent globally. So super excited to have this incredible group of companies and founders here to talk a little bit about their experiences. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So, Brice.
Hi everyone, my name is Brice. I'm the co-founder of Andela and currently serving as the Director of Engineering.
Charity Majors, co-founder and CEO of Honeycomb.io, infrastructure engineer.
I'm Vivek. I'm one of the founders and CEO of HackerRank.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. This is awesome to have you. So I'd like to start talking about skills. And we'll start with you, Brice, around Andela. And so that we know that increasingly innovation is everywhere, and especially on the African continent. So Brice, can you tell me a little bit more about the ways that Andela is developing kind of the next generation of software engineers in Africa?
Right, so at Andela we build distributed high-performing engineering teams with talented developers on the African continent. So we recruit talented people with high problem-solving skills and put them in a learning environment where they develop their technical and soft skills. We put a big emphasis on soft skills because we all know that good engineers don't work in a vacuum. You ultimately end up working on a team, and you have to collaborate with people. You need to collaborate with marketing teams, product teams, and other divisions within an organization in order to build great products. So we put an emphasis on soft skills and help our developers raise blockers, communication, and things like that to better prepare them to become engineers in global distributed workforce.
Awesome. Well, that's a great lead-in to Vivek and talking a little bit about these hubs that are developing around the world, not just in Africa. Can you talk a little bit about the origin of your company and kind of different areas that you see as kind of the hotbeds of innovation?
Yeah, sure. So our mission is to match every developer to the right job with the driver being skill over pedigree. So it shouldn't matter which school you went to, which company you worked at before. What matters is, do you have the skills to do the job or not? So we do a lot of analysis in terms of what kind of skills do companies want, where are they hiring from, and we actually did this really cool analysis of where are the high-performing algorithm problem-solving folks are there, and the highest weightage we got was from Wyoming. From Wyoming, and nobody would go ahead and look for engineers in that, but there was a very, very high concentrated pool of really talented software developers. The other thing that we're starting to...
And that wasn't obvious to you.
Yeah, that wasn't, yeah. From the data it was, after we actually did the data. We're also starting to see customers open up a lot of offices in Amsterdam, like in the Dutch. When you go to booking.com, Uber has opened an office, Dropbox has opened an office. I mean, their immigrant program is so strong and so powerful that they're able to attract talent from across the globe. If you go to, they're one of our customers, and if you enter booking.com office, it's like watching an Olympic ad. There are like so many different nationalities and so many people coming there. So I think those are like a lot of interesting developer hubs that are coming up on base.
What about in developing ecosystems?
Sorry?
In other developing ecosystems?
I think the other part is the schools, as the whole idea of, I think what people call as non-traditional developers. I don't like the term, but that's the best way to represent, which is people who didn't have like a great college degree, but who are graduating from boot camps, different schools that you probably don't go to. So that's a lot of, those are like really strong ecosystems that are actually increasing the supply of developers in the world right now.
Okay, well that's a great segue into Andela, talking about some of the e-learning topics we were talking about before. So love to just hear a little bit more about specifically Africa.
Yeah, within Andela, we provide our developers with access to platforms like Udacity and Pluralsight for independent skills development. And we also do a lot of tech talks and workshops and regular hackathons to build a community and fuel innovation. Beyond the developers that we can physically support in our locations, campuses in Africa, we've created the Andela learning community, where we engage over 10,000 learners and aspiring software developers, and we push out content to them all the time. And we also have regular meetups at our locations where they get mentorship from Andela developers. And as Vivek was mentioning, also in Africa, there's a lot of up-and-coming developer groups. Like Google dev groups and Facebook circles are very prominent in Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Uganda. And there's also a bunch of new dev groups that are created by locals, like 4Loop, Tech in Pink, and a bunch of others that are really about mentoring and getting more and more people to get involved in technology.
How are you guys involved in the groups at all? Are you facilitating them, or are you?
Right, so we provide a lot of facilities for them to host meetups. We also have our developers speak at some of these meetups and provide mentorship.
That's cool. Anyone else have any experience on that?
And what exactly?
Kind of the education element.
I mean, I learned Linux by reading other people's bash history files. Like, computers aren't hard. I think what I'm concerned about is the way, it feels like the industry is increasingly trying to professionalize, which is good in a lot of ways, having safety standards, being more like real engineers. But it concerns me that people, like me, who are liberal arts majors and who just like messing around, it's creating a bar. It's creating a bar with, like it's what they say about hair salons. Anybody can cut hair, but you can't actually go out and just open a salon because there's a certification. It's become like a cartel to keep wages high. And I'm kind of concerned that the same is happening to the industry.
Well, that's a great lead into what I wanted to ask you about, which is really cultivating people that don't necessarily have the resume, the pedigree, the education that checks all the boxes. How are you tell us a little bit more about Honeycomb, and how are you kind of working in that framework?
Well, I believe in.
Can you tell us about Honeycomb first?
Sure. Honeycomb is it's a kind of next generation observability for complex systems. It's like the first kind of distributed systems native way for exploring and understanding your systems, built off of our experience at Parse and Facebook in particular. Now you might think that this requires best in the world engineers, but there are two things. The computer problems are never the hard problems. It's product market fit and all these other problems that are the hard problems. And B, I think that it's important to remember that the great teams aren't always built up of the greatest engineers. These are two completely different skill sets. And you may need a traditional great engineer to kind of seed the team and like pull everyone up to their technical baseline. But there's been plenty of actual studies done around this that show that the great teams are made up of great teammates who enjoy learning from each other, who are collaborative, not the ones who are, who know the best algorithms. So when it comes to hiring at Honeycomb, I believe as a hiring manager, it's my job to open the door wider, to try and hire people based on their skills, their strengths, not lack of weaknesses. You've been in an interview and everybody's just quizzing you to see where you're weak. That's not what you're looking for. So we always ask people, what can we ask you, what can we do in the interview so that we get to see you at your best? So many people we talk to are not right for Honeycomb in this moment in time because their skills and strengths aren't exactly what we need. Nevertheless, we want them to show us what they think that they're best at,
Are they shocked when they get that question from you?
Everybody's shocked.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this should be super standard. But you're not hiring people for lack of weaknesses, because nobody has lack of weaknesses. You're hiring a team to complement each other. And it's more important for managers to know their teams and know what elements their team is lacking, what strengths they need to add to make the team a stronger unit than it is to screen for people who are this good at data structures and algorithms. That just doesn't make any sense.
I'd love for you to react to that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think one of the things that we have been even trying to say is how do you get the best version of the candidate in an interview? An interview right now is sort of designed to spook you, or here's a gotcha question that you're not able to answer, and there are a bunch of reasons for that, right? From the questions, right from the setup. How many developers actually write code on a whiteboard? on a day-to-day basis, like zero.
What percentage of the time that you're writing code is it greenfield code?
Yeah, right, exactly. But the interview setup, like there is a bunch of things that are not right with the interview process, which inherently makes it more biased in the process. And then also, defining what are the actual skills that you need in a job is also not straightforward. Like 8 years experience in a language that's not the way to define a skill. Like, here is how I'm defining the competency that I need for this role is much more concrete. You can actually, the advantage or the good part about hiring developers is you can be very concrete about the skills that you want and like define here's the competency. For example, whereas it's going to be really hard for you to do it for sales. Like you need a charismatic individual. Like how can you quantify charisma? It's very hard, but like you can actually quantify, I need this person to have this level of competency in these skills. So having that and understanding that it's about building a team that can work together well and the sum of all of them is greater than the individual parts, that's probably the harder part in the engineering hiring process.
I think that it's important to try and, like for my money, like what I want out of an interview is to mimic working with them as closely as I can, right? So what we do is, we have a piece of code that's crappy code, and we send it to the candidate the night before, and we let them ask any questions. We'll tell them what questions we're going to ask them because we're not trying to surprise them. If they want to prepare, that's fine. I don't think it takes preparation. I don't think it's going to improve, but if they want to know, that's fine. We send them a piece of code the night before, and we ask them to spend no more than an hour, no more than 2, making it better. And the interview isn't actually the code. The interview is the next day having a conversation about the code. Why did you choose this? What is left to do? What didn't you have time to do? We don't want them to spend all night making it perfect. We want them to take the time that they have, like you do in real life. Take the time that you have, the code that you have to add to or extend or improve, and then have like a pull request type discussion. Like, talk to me about the trade-offs. Any engineer who can communicate about what they're doing is more than capable of figuring out how to do the work. And the reverse is not necessarily true. There are plenty of people who can do the work, and they're going to get defensive. They don't know how to talk about what's going through their brain, and they're not used to that kind of discussion. And we definitely select for communication skills because we think that that's part of what makes a team really good.
Interesting. Curious how you guys at Andela approach that.
Yeah, I think as they were talking, one thing that came to my mind was around a lot of companies hire for cultural fit. And there's this interesting concept that I read a few days ago about culture add instead. So at Andela, we focus a lot on culture and what you can add to the culture as opposed to coming in and having to fit into a predefined culture. And I think it meant well with what you were saying around bringing people together, and the sum of everybody is greater than the individual parts. So I think that's one aspect that is very interesting to start looking at when hiring.
So Vivek, what are some of the actual skills that these developers around the world need to get the jobs that they want, like being really concrete?
Yeah, I don't think there's a universal one. I can tell you we ran a developer skills survey to our community of, I think the last year was over 3 million engineers, about 40,000 people participated. Go was the most popular language or things that is actually getting the highest traction. But at a high level, I would say, and this is not restricted to developers, this is like an advice that even somebody gave me, which is, what can you do so good that nobody else in the world can? And I would actually have a very similar version of that, which is your core problem solving skills have to be super strong as a developer. And then it's about what is the language or a framework that you gain mastery over, that you're so good, that you're in the top percentile. And then you can actually use that to adapt to any language, any framework, anywhere that you want. So that's probably what I would say. There's no generic or way to say, like, go and learn this language.
But this is what we've heard described as the T-shaped engineer, right? Where you go deep in something, and then you try to have broad skills. Like, once you've gone deep in something, you can go deep in anything, given the time.
What would your advice for engineers that are trying to, get jobs? What would that advice be? It seems like differentiation is one of the things that.
Yeah, I think engineers really need to focus on problem-solving skills and less on a specific language.
Okay.
I think once you learn any language, you can learn any other language. So I would focus more on problem-solving skills and, like she said, communication and collaboration, because ultimately, you don't work in a vacuum. You have to collaborate with people. You have to communicate your ideas. And things like that. So I think problem solving to me is one of the critical aspects of it being a good software engineer.
There's a big difference here between giving that advice between answering the question for junior engineers and senior engineers, right? Junior engineers, it's like, get to be a senior engineer as quickly as you can, and that means learning, going deep in a framework, not spreading yourself, learning 5 different, frameworks as just dipping your toes into each one, but like go deep in something and get as much exposure as you can to, like I never recommend to any junior engineer that they stay at one company for the entire, because you need to learn how different people do things. But then when you're a senior engineer, like I think that the advice is much more often about leadership and communication and persuasion and things that are not as technical, unless you're the archetype who really wants to do nothing but technical work, but then you still need to look for different ways to leverage your influence.
Yeah, I think if you want to move in a managerial path, it changes from being technically strong to how strong are you in building a team and
even
people.
If you're a tech lead,
Yeah.
like it's tech leads are managers, except for their primary loyalty is towards the tech, not towards the people. But it's still all about herding cats and.
All right, so obviously companies have to figure out new ways to attract and keep engineering talent. So I'd love to hear from you, Brice, on what are some of the things that they should be thinking about to attract that talent that maybe is differentiated?
Right, I think at Andela we believe that the future of work is distributed. So I think the first thing is to look beyond your local markets. During the keynote yesterday, they mentioned that 80% of the GitHub users are outside of the US. So to me, that says that companies should be looking to tap into that global workforce, to look for the best talent and not necessarily just focus on the nearest talent.
And what about those grumpy VCs who say like, oh, your engineering talent needs to be in-house, or obviously you don't believe that, but like, how do you change that mindset?
That's why they're grumpy.
Well, I do think that if you're building global products, it requires a global team because different, diverse set of opinions, diverse ways of thinking about a problem and approaching a problem ultimately leads to better problem solving and creative solutions.
Anyone else? How do you change that mindset or some of the...
Yeah, to me it's all about impact. The engineers need to feel the impact all the time. I think that's what is, oftentimes you're shipping code, you're constantly doing it, but how does it connect to the business? How do you connect to the business impact? It comes from, I don't know if it's the engineering manager or the PMs or right from the top. That is what is a huge determinant of retention in an organization, is am I making an impact? And then there's a personal growth aspect to it. But impact is huge, and that's why you see startups early on. You can actually see the impact, and as you get bigger and bigger, it starts to dilute, and you have retention issues.
Well, the science says that like the thing that people look for in life, like, and engineers are people too. It says that the things that people look for in life are autonomy and mastery and purpose. Yeah, and I think that this is the trick. Like, giving people the autonomy, the amount of impact that they can have, connecting, like you said, to the business value. And I actually agree that the future of work is distributed. But, I mean, we can't dismiss the fact that, number one, you can't have distributed people. You have to have distributed teams. Because if you have just a few people who are remote, you have remote people. It's the entire team has to buy into it. I encourage everyone on my team. We have a largely SF-based team. I encourage everyone to work from home or remote regularly so that they remember what it feels like to not be in the room with everyone, because it changes your whole way of working. And it does slow you down a little. Like, it does. There's nothing as fast as you all are in the room together, going to lunch together, just spitballing. Like, you lose a little bit of that, which is fine, as you're growing. I think that what the VCs are glomming onto is that nugget of truth that in the beginning, when it's enough of you that can share a pizza, you do move faster if you're in the same room. But that is not really true after that.
So that's a good point. When is the right time?
You have to start early. You have to bake it into your DNA as a company. We started as early as we possibly could. We knew when it was the right time because our first couple of attempts failed, and eventually they started working. And we were like, aha, we must be at that time.
So what are you seeing, Vivek, in terms of when is the right time to utilize?
Yeah, it's a DNA thing. It's super hard to change after you reach, like, let's say 30, 40 engineers, and after you build out a.
So what does that mean? They should be literally starting from their
a lot of
first
companies.
hire?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say GitLab, which is a competitor to GitHub. I hope nobody is going to be okay with it. I mean, GitLab is fully distributed right from day one. There are a lot of other companies that I know who are running. Zapier is an example of another company. Like, it's fully distributed right from day one, because I think Why? I think there are a lot of communication challenges that you would have, and you need to instill writing notes, like meeting will be recorded or like will be posted, and all of those things needs to happen from day one. It's going to be very hard after you build a sizable team to completely change the dynamics of how your existing people are going to adapt to the new one. So if you want to go distributed or remote, it has to be on day one, yeah.
That's interesting. So how do you screen for that sensibility in terms of being
skills, for sure.
communicative, et cetera?
Yeah, I think communication will play a huge part in it, and I would still like having the rigor in your hiring process should not be any lower. I think the advantage is that you get access to a wider talent pool, which you would not get. But I would still recommend people to come on site for the initial week or so to get used to you, like even during the interview process. Like, are you able to work with this person initially, and then have the ability to go ahead and build it remote or distributed? Yeah.
Sorry, Charity, I think I interrupted you. You had some thoughts on that? Yeah, no, I'd love to hear when you guys think is the right time to start looking external.
I mean, at Andela, we started right from the beginning, very early on, and yeah, like they both said, it was part of the DNA, and recognizing that everything was going to be distributed, and coming up with those set of best practices when it comes to distributed.
And then how do you advise your customers on that?
Right, yeah, so exactly the same way we come up with a set of practices that we believe for good distributed teams. But one point Vivek mentioned is also that we do have our developers go to the partner site to build rapport during the early phases, to meet with the people they'll be working on before going back to being distributed. That also helps a lot. Yeah,
we have an office in like Mountain View, Bangalore, and London. It's so amazing how in-person interaction changes the dynamics. Pre-meeting in person and post, even though you're going to be remote even after that.
So talk about that a little more. How is it different?
I've not been able to pinpoint. It's probably more like a human thing. But like once you meet this person, oh, this is the person I've been slacking and emailing all along, and I get to know you better. I now understand why you are coming from. What's your perspective? Why did you ask? You start to associate tone. Whenever somebody emails you, you always associate a tone to that email, and now that becomes more of a, I don't know, friendlier tone of, or assuming the right intent. Oh, you know what, like, that is why this person actually emailed or Slack, versus by default, the email tone would, your assumption would be like, why are you sending this in the middle of the night? That changes a lot.
So those company offsites are good, we should go to them.
Company offsites, and more specifically intercompany travel, that helps a lot. Yeah.
Cool. So we touched a little bit on empathy and the impact that global distributed teams are creating more kind of inclusive culture. So I'd love to hear from Andela's point of view, how you view that, and like what is the actual impact on that?
I personally think that distributed work setting sort of levels up the playing field, because it opens up different ways of communicating, different communication channels. So for example, in my personal experience, when I was a junior engineer, it was very daunting sometimes to be sitting in a room with a bunch of senior engineers and speaking up and sharing my ideas around architecture decision or the product strategy that the team should take. But in a distributed work setting, I can use Slack reactions, Slack messages. If we're all on a Zoom call, I can use a chatbot to post a question and things like that. So I do think that distributed kinds of flex enables us all to flex that muscle to be able to be a little bit more inclusive and more empathetic and more considerate to everyone in the collaboration.
How about you, Charity? How is empathy being built into your workflows?
I can.
Or how do you build them into?
We're actually building this into our product in a lot of ways. I feel like most of the tools we build for engineers don't really take into account how teams work. And we build nothing for individuals. We build everything for teams, because if I'm getting paged about something and I've never seen it before, but I remember that we got paged about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I think Christine was on call. I just want to go look and see, how did she do it? What did she think was important enough to post it to Slack? And I feel like this is having that sense of context and history, and it's the new version of being able to look over someone's shoulder or read their bash history file, right? Like, you learn so much about just imitating people, and I feel like in a distributed context, it's easy to lose that, and our tools need to pick up the slack.
Yeah, no, I think I think you can have like a good personality looking at bash history file. I'm just thinking through it.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like that can be like a good skill. I know I'm not answering your question, but I was just thinking, is that like another dimension that you can add on how, like, what kind of a developer you are by looking
If anyone would show me their bash history file, I'm sure I could make a judgment on whether or not to hire them right there.
Like I'm just thinking, that's pretty interesting. Yeah,
So,
empathy is, I think there is a default assumption that engineers are introverts and they don't talk and they don't, they don't want to participate and all of those things. And I'm an engineer myself. I used to work at Amazon and all of those things. I think there is a, there is a typecast. I think the best way to empathy is to actually understand that you can go and talk to engineers and they understand about the product and they actually understand about the business, surprisingly way stronger than most people that you would actually have.
We select for this in our interview process. We only want to hire engineers who care about the business, who don't have this like view of sales and marketing as being like, over there. We want engineers who are curious and who regard it as part of their job, and
Can you give us some tips on how you screen for that?
We ask them.
But like more specific.
We actually do a very similar one. Every engineer that we have hired so far has to present a business plan of their idea. Assume you have $10 million. What would you do? How would you do? And it's amazing to see how they come and present. Every engineer. I know it's not a scalable one because my time is limited and all of those things. And my recruiting coordinators are always like complaining about this stuff. But that is the final step. And it's amazing to see how they break down a large problem into sub-problems, how they actually do it. It's pretty fascinating.
That's intense. We try to ask questions to tease out their technical judgment, basically. And if they include factors like, well, if we build this product, what isn't getting built? If I spend my time, going off and writing a storage engine for fun, what is the maintenance cost, and is it worth it? It's pretty easy to see who's working in strict technical terms and who's looking around at other teams and the actual impact of what they're doing. And also just like talking about sales and marketing, and if they roll their eyes or if they, just how people will make these like gestures of contempt, like we're all in a tribe together, we expect you to share this with us. And we're like, no, we don't share that.
You guys do a lot of screening. How about?
Yeah, I think always looking for engineers that are asking the why, essentially. Always curious and always trying to get to the root of things and not just taking stories and taking product requirements and kind of being code monkeys. But always asking why. How is this improving the products? Why are we doing this? Why are we going this direction? And always asking to get a better sense of things.
The flip side of widening the door and letting more people into your interviewing process, taking a chance on someone, taking a risk on someone, is that I think you have to be more willing to let people go soon. And you have to look for ways to make it not traumatic for everyone, but to look at it like, we're going to intentionally hire more people because we're looking for reasons to take risks on people, but this means that there's going to be higher risk. Not as many people are going to work out as if we had an extremely high bar and we were like giving people a month-long intensive interview. No, we're choosing to take a risk on people, and so you kind of have to just repeat yourself and communicate that over and over and show it with your actions in every way. But you can't have both, right?
Yeah, so that's I guess what's interesting. And then how does that reflect on you? I mean, I guess you need a lot of communication with the people that you're working with, that this is the strategy,
no one should ever be surprised.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone should know where they stand, good or bad. And that requires managers with a very high level of self-awareness and ability to have hard conversations.
Okay. So final question, how can companies empower software developers to not just be the best coders, but to be like true leaders within the organization? So I'd love to hear some thoughts around leadership.
I think it starts with the organization kind of asking the developers, what kind of leader do you want to be, right? I think at Andela, we sometimes made the mistake of assuming that every developer wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. But like sometimes some developers just want to be technical and they just want to be really, really senior and push the boundary of technology, while others want to build communities, while others want to build open source. Some developers at Andela want to go back into the academic system and change the way computer science is taught in schools. So different things like that. So as an organization, we want to be able to create avenues for everybody to kind of express their form of tech leadership.
Yeah, I think it's I think that every senior engineer should do management at some point, if only to like build empathy for the poor souls who choose that as a long-term career. And I also think that like going back and forth is really valuable. If you have a line manager, the best line managers are no more than 3 or 4 years removed from actually shipping code. Which means that if they want to do that job, they kind of have to go back and periodically refresh their skills. I'm a huge believer in that management is not a promotion, it's a career change. Like they should be paid the same or less than the engineers. And it shouldn't be like, yay, congratulations. You really have to pay attention to your language, you know? If you start calling it a promotion, then it's a demotion if they want to go back to engineering. No. This is a flat, you know, it's not a flat organization, but you're equals.
So do you believe that engineers should try these different positions?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So it should be no big deal to
I mean,
like,
even when people know that they're like better as individual contributors, you find
some people know in their souls and they have no interest in it. Bless them. More people are curious, you know, or they're like, oh, I think I could do that job better than that person, you know, and you don't know until you try it. I think that everyone who's interested in it should try it, but nobody should be forced to do it because nobody wants to report to someone who's forced into that job.
You're very similar. I think there are, you know, I've seen in our company engineers wanting to continue the path, moving to engineering management, moving to product management as well. But I think one of my biggest learnings is to make it very explicit to the engineer on what the role change will entail. That engineering manager means that it's about empowering people, building teams. A lot of your time and energy and everything is going to be focused on that. Do you enjoy writing performance reviews, right, of people? If you don't, hey, you know, you should actually naturally want people to get better. Then it's probably not a good path. Like product manager, do you actually enjoy sitting in front of customers, cross-functional coordination, writing PRDs? Like, do you really enjoy doing that? I think not setting that expectation because it just feels like a promotion, like, you know, oh, engineer to engineering manager, engineering to product manager, and everybody wants to continue to get better, but if you don't set the right expectation, it's a disaster. I've had both pros and cons on this.
This is why you must have an engineering ladder, so that people who want to be engineers actually have that sense of proceeding and getting better.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you guys think about kind of leadership development or the, you know, the moving up or sideways?
Yeah, I mean, there's typically the individual contributor path and the management path, yeah? And then on the individual contributor path, you become more and more senior and kind of push the boundary of technology. And then on the management path is about building teams, like they said, you know, helping develop others, people that you manage. So it's really a lot of your time is spent around, you know, people management, team building, and things like that. So those are typically the two paths, but I also think that there should be other avenues to be able to contribute to open source and, you know, give tech talks and do different things like that to enable like engineers to kind of be fully rounded.
So what would be the advice? Say, I'm a startup, I'm based here in San Francisco, you know, we have all our engineering here, we have about 10 people, you know, I've never explored any type of, you know, developers in Africa or whatnot. What's the first step for me, would you say?
I think the first step is education and learn about it. I think there's a lot of tech ecosystems coming up in developing countries, like in Africa, on the African continent, in Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Egypt, and other parts of the continent. So I do think that the first step is education.
What about Charity? What would be your advice for me?
I didn't understand the question.
I'm thinking about growing my team outside of, you know, the traditional, let me hire my friends. What's the first thing I should think about?
I think that the first thing you should do is start thinking clearly and writing clearly about what your philosophy is, what your hiring process is, what's different about your company, why people should want to work there. I used to hate company values, and I would roll my eyes at them, and I still roll my eyes at very cliche company values, which is almost all of them. But actually, it's really important to know who you are and how you're different from other places. Why should anyone want to work with you?
What about you, Vivek?
I think if you're starting a company and if you're just 10 engineers or 5 engineers or whatever, I think it should be the founder's DNA firstly, to be open to looking outside or building a remote. If the founders or whoever is the founding team does not fundamentally believe in this, then it's not going to work. Then it's actually much better to just pay crazy salaries and just can burn more money.
I'm open to it, but I'm used to doing everything myself. So like using using you guys, like what's my first step of saying
so
like, I have to look outside of myself and like my buddies that I'm going to hire because I can't scale the company.
Yeah, I think one is just being open to the fact that you should, again, like, skill trumps pedigree. Firstly, to really understand the core foundation. I think that should be straightforward, whether you're building it in San Francisco or remote. And but if you're thinking about like building a remote or an offshore, like when you're like 8 people or 10 people, then you have to really build your communication architecture. This is how we're going to do, and you have to lay the foundation, and you have to be fully bought in, because there are certain things that are irreversible in a company, and this will be one of them.
What I'm hearing you say is that you have to change your current team. They can't stay the way they are. They have to be bought in too.
Distributed.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts? I think we covered a lot here.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for hosting it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.